Welcome to brand new course, Developing Mobile Applications using Flutter. Flutter is a platform provided by Google to create native mobile applications. It supports both Android and iOS platforms. It can be used without even using Android Studio or Xcode. We'll be developing Flutter apps using Visual Studio Code in this course. Flutter makes use of dot programming, which is quite similar to C++, Java, or C#. So if you are familiar with any of these, you will find yourself at ease when developing applications using dot programming. Flutter makes fast development quite easier, and it has built-in native widgets for building expressive and flexible user interfaces. Flutter is already popular and it is being used across many global organizations for developing mobile applications. So in the next lecture, we'll see how we can set up Flutter. So before proceeding to the Flutter setup, let's discuss why we will be using Dot with Flutter. Now, Dot is also created by Google, and as a programming language, it can be used to create web as well as mobile applications. The primary reason why we'll be using Dot is that it's productive. That is, if you're coming from C++, C# or Java background, you'll really relate yourself with the syntax, which is clear and concise. Dot is also fast. That is, it provides optimizing ahead of time compilation to get predictably high performance and fast startup. It's also portable as it compiles to ARM and x86 code base, and that's the reason why Dot mobile applications can run natively on Android, iOS, and beyond. For web applications, Dot transpiles to JavaScript. As mentioned earlier, that transitioning to Dot is quite easy, and it will take a couple of days time to understand the syntax and basics of dot programming if you're coming from C, C++ or C# or Java background. Dot is also pretty well suited to reactive programming with support for managing short-lived objects such as UI widgets. Dot also supports asynchronous programming through language features and APIs. In order to check out how cool Dot is, we have Dotpad, which can be accessed at dotpad.lang.org. So let me give you a quick look to that as well. Here you can see we are accessing dotpad.lang.org, and this is a simple program that we have over here. So it's a main method, and one can easily relate to a main method in C# or in C++. And here all we are doing is looping through using a for loop and printing dot is easy and then the value of the variable I. And if I just run this, you'll see the updated code coming up. So it's starting with 0 to 4. I can just change it to 1 and I less than equal to 5. This time when I'll run it, you can see the updated code coming up over here. So that's how easy it is to write code in Dot. We'll be covering more aspects of Dot as we move along with the Flutter applications that we'll be developing. Now that we have seen what Flutter is and why we will be using Dot to develop applications in Flutter, it's time now to see how we can install Flutter on various platforms. We'll be starting with Windows and then we'll be covering Mac operating system. In order to install Flutter on Windows, the basic system requirement is to have 400 MB of disk space, and operating system should be Windows 7 SP1 or later, and it must be 64-bit. You must have Windows PowerShell and Git for Windows installed, with the option use Git from the Windows command prompt. We then need to have Flutter SDK. It's available as a zip file, and you can grab the latest one from this URL, that is flutter.io docs. get started install Windows. Once you have downloaded the zip file, you can extract it inside a directory, let's call it Flutter, and then in that directory you'll find a batch file called flutter_console.batch. You just need to double click on it to execute it, and once done you'll be able to run Flutter from your command prompt. You can also go ahead and update the path variable of your Windows path, and there you need to include flutter/bin in your path, so that way you can execute Flutter from anywhere. So from any given directory you can execute the command Flutter. After that you need to ensure that you have all the things properly set up, and to do that you'll be running Flutter Doctor. Now Flutter Doctor checks your environment and displays a report of the status of your Flutter installation. After that, if you want to work closely on Windows, you must have Android Studio set up. It's not a requirement, but if you have it, it will be better. So in order to install Android Studio, you can follow the instructions provided in the same URL, flutter.io docs get started install Windows. We'll be covering how to install Flutter and integrate it with Visual Studio Code on Windows operating system. I already have Android Studio set up on my system, so what I'll do now is quickly show you how to download the Flutter SDK, extract it, and run the flutter console.batch file. So let's get started. So here I'll be downloading the Flutter Windows version 1.0.0 stable.zip. It's around 321 MB. It will take a couple of minutes to download. So you can see that I have extracted the contents now inside a directory called Flutter, and then we have this file called flutter_console.batch. You just need to double click on this to run it, and there you have it. This is your Flutter console now, and let's go ahead and run Flutter Doctor. Now you can see that there's one instruction given, so we can just copy this and paste it over here. I've already installed JIT, so here you can see that it's cloning now. Now that I have cloned a copy of it, I can go ahead and run Flutter Doctor. So here you can see that it says that if you want to disable the analytics data that gets sent to Google, you can just go ahead and run this command, flutter config no analytics, to disable analytics and crash. And here you can see the issues that Flutter Doctor found. So Flutter channel beta, Microsoft Windows version this, that's fine. Now Android toolchain developed for Android devices, SDK 25.0.1, the license status is unknown. Then we have Android Studio version 3.1, but it says that Flutter plugin not installed, and dot plugin is not installed as well. So these are the two things that we'll need to take care of. And then it has got this IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition. For that we need to have Flutter and dot plugin installed as well. Now it also identified that VS Code, Visual Studio Code 32-bit edition, is available and there are no devices connected. So in the next lecture what we'll do is we'll be going ahead and we'll be installing these plugins, and we'll also set a Visual Studio Code integration. So more on that will be coming up in the next lecture. In the previous lecture, we downloaded the Flutter SDK, and when we ran this Flutter Doctor, there were certain issues that were coming up. For instance, we need to take care of this Android license status unknown, and then for the Android Studio, we have to include Flutter plugin and dot plugin. So here I have opened my Android Studio, and I'll go to File, then we need to go to Settings, and inside the plugins, we'll be searching for Flutter. And here you can see we have Flutter now, so we'll click on this install and just accept it over here. The plugin wants you to install requires dot, which have to be installed as well. Proceed, yes, and this will basically install both Flutter as well as dot plugin. And next you can click on restart Android Studio and click OK over here. So let's go ahead and do this. So as you can see, it's now loading again, Android Studio, and once it's done loading, what we'll do is we'll rerun the Flutter Doctor command. So here I'll go and I'll say Flutter Doctor, and let's see what's the status now. And there we have it. it says Android Studio version 3.2, and the Flutter and Dart plugin error messages that were earlier coming up are now resolved. So all we need to do is take care of this Android license status unknown thing. So let's go ahead and try resolving that as well. In order to resolve the Android licenses issue, what I've done is in the command prompt, as you can see, I executed this command SDK manager space -- update, and once it's done, you'll be back at the command prompt. Now the next step will be to execute the Flutter Doctor Android licenses, and let's see how it goes. You can see that it has started it now, and all you need to do is accept all the terms and conditions that will appear on the screen. So let me maximize it, and here I'll be selecting Y for this as yes, again Y, again Y, again Y, again Y over here, and that's pretty much it. Next we'll be running Flutter Doctor -v, that's the verbose mode where you will get all the detailed analysis of the Flutter Doctor command. So now here you can see Flutter channel beta, everything is in place. For Android toolchain we have all the prerequisites, that's Android SDK, then we have NDK, platform Android, Android home, Java binary, Java version, and all Android licenses accepted. Then for the Android Studio, we have Android Studio, Flutter plugin, Dart plugin, and Java version. So this is it that we need for developing Android applications using Flutter. For VS Code, you can see that it says the 32-bit edition is available, and we have not installed the Flutter extension. Now that we will be covering in the next lecture. In this lecture, we'll be taking a look at how we can set up Visual Studio Code as our favorite editor to develop Flutter application. In this one, we'll be covering installing extensions for Flutter and Dart in our Visual Code Studio. Then we'll see the commands that we'll be using. Primarily, we'll be focusing on Windows, so we'll be making use of Shift plus Control plus P, and this will allow us to create a new project. And before doing that, we'll be also setting up Flutter SDK path in our Visual Studio Code. So let's get started. So here I've opened Visual Studio Code, and I'll be going to extensions, and here I'll need to search for Flutter, and the first one that comes up in the result set, Flutter Support and Debugger, is the one that we need to install. Clicking on install will start the installation process, and once done, you'll get the notification over here, and there we go. We have installed it successfully. There's one more plugin that we need to do, and that is for Dart language support, which also you can click on reload to reload. It gets installed along with Flutter itself, so just clicking on reload will do. And here you can see inside enabled we have Dart and Flutter enabled. Now pressing the Shift Control and P will give us this command prompt, and here if you type Flutter, you'll see Flutter new project. If I go ahead and click on this, it will prompt me to locate the SDK. Let's click on locate SDK, and I have installed it inside course Flutter, and then Flutter directory, Flutter, and we need to select the bin directory, and that's all. Click on set Flutter SDK folder, and there you go. Now you can enter the name of the project. For instance, it says Hello World, so we can go ahead and do that, Hello World as the project, and press enter to confirm. And here it will ask which is the folder where you want to create this project. So I'll be clicking projects, and inside that we'll be creating our first Flutter project. And there you can see it has opened the project now, Hello World, and it says dark code has been updated to version 2.21.1, and here it's working on Flutter create Hello World. So all the output you can see over here. Now it is working on the Dart extension, and In this lecture, we'll take a look at how we can debug the Flutter default application that we created in earlier lecture. So over here, a couple of points that we need to ensure is that the environment variables that we have over here, Android Home and Android SDK root, should be set up properly. You must have an emulator installed on your system to check it. Otherwise, you'll need a real device to connect, and then the application will be launched on that device. So once you have taken care of that, you will be required to click on the debug menu option. Once you'll click on this, it will ask you to set up a launch file, which will be shown inside VS Code launch.json. Here I have provided the full path for the program, which is inside the lib directory main.dot. So this is the file which we are mentioning over here in the launch.json file. Once you have this configuration enabled, you need to launch your emulator from the Android Studio, or you can just go ahead and say AVD, and this will bring up the AVD manager, using which you can launch the emulator like I've done over here. There you go. So you can select one and you can click on start. Mine is already started. That's the reason why you see it disabled. So here, once the emulator is up and running and you have created your launch.json file as well, all you need to do is click on this play button or start debugging icon. Once you will do that, it will prompt you to select the emulator. You will be selecting that, and once that's done, it will attach the app with that emulator, and here you can see all the verbose mode messages are coming up. Once that's executed properly, you'll see the app running over here, as you can see in my case. So this is just a simple application which just count how many number of times you have clicked on the plus icon. So if I click on over here, you can see the counter is incremented to 2, similarly 3, and that's pretty much it that this app does. But the main point here is to see how we can configure the the Flutter dot application, and run it using an emulator, which we have covered in this lecture. In this lecture, we'll take a look at how we can go ahead and download Android Studio. Android Studio is not required for development purposes, but we need to download it to ensure that we have emulators available, and which can then be associated with the Visual Studio Code, as we have been demonstrating in previous lectures. So for that purpose, we need to download Android Studio and configure it. Let's get started. So the first thing is we will go to developer.android.com/studio, and there you can download the Android Studio for Windows. Once downloaded, you'll need to launch it. We need to go to Tools, and there we need to click on SDK Manager. Inside the SDK Manager, go to Android SDK, and there ensure that under SDK Tools tab you have Android Emulator checked and Intel x86 Emulator Accelerator, that's HaxM Installer, installed. So these two must be installed on your system, and obviously, as you can see here, the SDK is installed at this location, and the same needs to be updated in your path variables. And for that, we need to click on this environment variable, and under that you need to set these two, Android Home and Android SDK root. So these two are also required, and obviously the Java home directory. And that's pretty much it in order to get you started with Android emulators. In this lecture, we'll take a look at how we can create a virtual device, and then that device will be used as an emulator for our application, Flutter application. So let's get started. In order to create a virtual device like the one you're seeing over here, what we need to do is go to Tools, click on AVD Manager, and then this screen will pop up. You need to select Create Virtual Device. So click over here, and then you can choose the device category. Over here we are talking about phone, and as you can see, I have one with Nexus 5x. All the resolution and density data is shown over here. You can choose the one which you want. Make sure that you have the necessary files available, and for instance over here I have got the Android SDK 25, as you can see over here, API 25. So when you click on next, it will show you what all system images you are having. Like I have got this NuGet API level 25, that is Android 7.1.1. so this virtual device, when it will be up and running, it will be using this image. Other tabs are also there, x86 and other images, and from here you can proceed and download the one which you feel like. And this is the recommended one, so I'll be going with that, and just click next and give it a name. You can choose the setup orientation of this emulator device, and next step will be clicking on finish, and that will set up the virtual device. And next time when you want to run your application on an emulator, the first thing that you need to do is launch your emulator first. So you'll again go to tools, and from there you'll select AVD manager, and then you'll click on this button which says launch emulator, and here you can see it has launched the virtual device or emulator. And all you need to do now is go to your Visual Studio Code and run your application in debug mode, and the emulator will show your application. So that was all about creating a virtual device using Android Studio. In this lecture, we'll be taking a look at basic widgets in Flutter. Widgets in general can be treated as basic building blocks of an application. In Flutter, we have stateless and stateful widgets. We also have layout widgets, and we'll be exploring all these types in this lecture. So to start with, we'll be proceeding with a stateless widget first. So here in our application, inside main.dot file, you'll notice the first line says class myApp extends stateless widget. So this class that we have over here is a widget in itself, which is coming from a stateless widget. When we say stateless, that means this widget will not retain any data when the application will be rerun. The state widget, as we have over here, that is stateful widget, contains a state object, as you can read from the comments, and this contains fields that affect how the application will look. Here you'll notice the my home page has got two things, key and title. Key is then passed to the super class, that is the stateful widget class, and here this one is basically providing a theme to our application. So it says title Flutter demo, and then theme, here we have the theme data, primary swatch, which is the colors.blue, and then the home page title comes as Flutter demo home page. And here you can see we are having the state created, so my home page state, create state, my home page state. So that's how this becomes a stateful widget. And here you can see its definition, class my home page state extends state. So state over here is not a widget, it's a class, and this basically makes use of the counter variable, which gets incremented every time you click on that plus icon or button. Then, as I mentioned, we will be now looking at layout widgets. So in Flutter, even this center that you are seeing is a widget which is used to center the child elements. So center, column, all these are used for layout widgets. Then we have text. So the text that comes up that you have pushed the button this many times is also a widget in Flutter. And you can go ahead and change this text or include one more text, as we have two texts over here. That is, one just says a static message, you have pushed the button this many times, and the other one is actually making use of the counter variable that we defined in our state. So here, as you can see, this is the counter variable which was declared, and it's a state variable, and it can be accessed in a text widget as shown over here. So in short, we have covered stateless, stateful, and layout widgets in this lecture. This lecture will be exploring material components in our Flutter application. So Flutter comes bundled with material components and theme. One can easily change things like color of the application using material theme. The complete list of material widgets that are available with Flutter is available at flutter.io docs development UI widgets material. So let's go ahead and take a look at our application. Here in our main.dot file, you'll notice the widget that we have over here, build, returns a material app, and this material app has got the title, theme, and primary swatch. If you hover over this, Visual Studio will simply show you all the options available for that color blue, and you can choose which one you like, and that color will become the primary swatch for your application. So you can choose which option you want. Like if I go over here and say yellow and hover on this, it will show me all the options. So I can say colors.limescent. So this will become the color as primary swatch. So here you can see that I can change the color option like this. So these are the options available. Then you also have color accent, but that is not going to be part of the primary swatch because primary swatch expects a color. And here if we try to do color.orange accent, you'll get an error message as we were getting earlier. So for instance, if I go ahead and type this, it's going to show an error saying that the primary color palette chosen from one of the swatches defined by the material design spec. So you cannot have this for primary swatch. Rather than that, you can have orange. So that way you can change the material theme color of your application. Apart from this, let's take a look at the widgets that we have. So here in this URL development UI widgets material, you'll see various categories available like app structure and navigation, and for that we have scaffold, app bar, bottom navigation bar, tab bar view, and material app. Here you can see that we are making use of this material app in our application. So here, this is the material app widget that we are making use of. And for each of these widgets, we have a documentation link which will guide on how to make use of this. Similarly, we have other options as well like buttons. Then we have input and selections like checkboxes, toggle switches, sliders, date time pickers. And for dialog, alerts, and panels, we have simple dialog, alert dialog, bottom sheet, expansion panel, and snack bar. Then in order to display information, we have images, icon, chip, tooltip, data table, card, and linear progress indicator. Then we have grid view, and for layout we have list tile, stepper, divider. So these are some of the most frequently used widgets available, and there are many others as well, as you can see when you scroll down this section, widgets catalog. For each of these widgets, as mentioned earlier, you can go ahead and see the documentation on how to make use of it, and most of the documentation that we have will guide you with all the constructor methods, properties, and as you can see over here, methods. So this is really helpful when you're working on a project where you feel like making use of some of the widgets and you don't know how to go about it. This documentation will then help you a lot. So that was pretty much it about the material component and themes. in our application. In this lecture, we'll be exploring widget catalog provided by Flutter. You can access widget catalog by visiting flutter.io docs development UI widgets URL as shown over here. And here you will find many widgets like basic material components we already explored in the previous lecture. Then iOS style widgets, layout, text. We also explored text where we were going through our application, exploring stateless state widgets. Then we have assets, images, and icons, input, animation in motion, interaction models, styling, painting, asynchronous, scrolling, and accessibility. Now, they all have documentation associated with them, so you can click over here and explore more about it. Like if I want to read about text, you can click on this visit link, and this is going to open all about text widgets like text, rich text, default text style, and then you can click on the documentation to see how to make use of the text widget. Like over here, the text widget says hello, then the name, how are you, alignment, overflow, and style can also be provided along with it. If you want to make use of the rich text, that has got text span, text, and then children. So here you have all the constructors, properties for that particular widget, and methods as well. In the next lecture, we'll be taking one such widget and we'll be adding it to our default application that we have created so far, and we'll explore these attributes, methods of that particular widget to understand it in a better way. In this lecture, we'll take a look at how we can make use of a widget that we have explored earlier in the widget catalog. So here in our widgets catalog, we'll be taking a look at the list tile widget. In order to implement this, we'll first of all visit its documentation by clicking on the documentation link. And here, as you can see, we have a list tile widget which has two attributes, that is leading and tile. So if I have to make use of a list tile, these are the minimum requirements that we have to provide. Let's click on the copy to clipboard icon, and this will be copied. Now we'll go to our code, and here, as you can see, the app is already running in Android emulator, and here we will be making use of the copied code just inside the children widget. So above the text, we'll go ahead and paste this tile, then a comma. So, and if I copy it one more time and press enter, we have two icons now. And if I show you the app now, you'll notice the hot reload is in action, and these are the two icons appearing, and then we have the text as well. That is the title of the list tile. So here, if I remove this and press a dot, you'll see most of the icons are available, which you can obviously go ahead and use. So these are all the icon data, and if you choose any one and save the app, you'll see performing hot reload, and this gets synced, and here you'll see the icon being refreshed. Similarly, we can go ahead and change the title as well. Press save, and again the changes will be reflected. So that's how easy it is to incorporate a widget in Flutter. In this lecture, we'll be starting with exploring the interactivity feature. So till now we have explored that whenever we are clicking on that button, it's incrementing the counter value. And in this lecture, we'll be seeing how exactly it's doing that. So let's get started. Here you can see the counter value is currently at 0. When I click on this button plus, it goes to 1. So how exactly it's doing that? If I show you, this is the button that we have. That is the floating action button. And this has got 3 attributes. The child is an icon. That is, add icon is shown. Tooltip is increment. So when you hover on that, you'll see it says increment. And on pressed, it's calling increment counter. Now increment counter is a function. Let's go and see that function. Here you can see in my homepage state, we have a function called increment counter, and this is internally calling set state and incrementing the value of counter variable by 1. If you go to set state, inside that only we are incrementing the counter by +1. So the variable underscore counter is defined over here, integer, counter 0, and when you click on that button, this function gets called, which in turn calls the set state, and there we increment the value of counter by 1. And the reason why we have to call set state, as you can see from the comment itself, that it needs to rebuild whenever something changes. So if we just go and increase the value of counter by 1 and we do not call it inside the set state method, then the build method would not be called again and nothing would appear to happen. So that's the reason why we are putting it over here inside the set state method. And that's how easy it is to call a function. You specify the function, and inside that function you can just go ahead and write the business logic. So in the next lecture we'll be exploring by creating one of our own buttons and calling an event on that button's click. In this lecture we'll be taking a look at how to add interactivity in our application. So for now you can see the application is running over here and it's not showing anything as of now. So what we'll be doing over here is whenever we'll click on this button, it will create an item over here. And for that, what we have written is inside the body, you can see all the previous code has been removed. All we are doing over here is we are taking a list view builder, which is going to build a set of list items. Now here, this list view builder contains item count, and this item count is initialized with the counter variable. And then we have item builder. So here you can pass anything which you want to return. For instance, we are returning list style, which has got this leading, that is an icon, and then title. So based on the number of counter values, the list style will be generated. So if it's 1, it will be 1. If it's 2, it will be 2. And the counter value, as you can see, is incremented on the onPressed event inside this method called increment counter. So let's go ahead and click on this plus icon, and there you go. If we press it one more time, the item keeps on generating new list items, and that's how we are using interactivity in our application. In this lecture, we'll be taking a look at how we can create routing and navigation in our application. So over here till now, we had one page which was just showing the list items based on the number of times this plus button was clicked. Now in this one, what we'll do is whenever we are clicking on any of these list items, it will take us to the next screen. In order to build the next screen, we need to follow what we have over here. So you can see, to create a screen, we need to have a class which either extends state widget or stateless widget. In our case, we are extending stateless widget. And then we need to implement the override method build, which in turn contains, if I explore over here, it's returning scaffold, that is having app bar, and the app bar is then having title. And then we are having body over here and next, whatever is required. So the same goes over here with our next page. We are having scaffold, passing the app bar over here, and then setting the title of the next screen as this is the next screen. Then we are having a body. Now that body is containing a child, which is nothing but a raised button. Now clicking on that raised button, that is the onPressed event, we are making use of the navigator.pop method. Now navigator is actually responsible for navigating between screens. So if I have to go back, I will make use of navigator.pop method and I'll pass the context over here. And if I have to go to the next screen, I'll make use of navigator.push method, which we'll be exploring pretty soon. And then here the button text will be reading back. So on clicking of the back button, we'll be going back to the first screen. Now here, when we need to click on the list item, what we need to do is make use of the onTap event. Now on clicking of onTap, we're making use of navigator.push, and then we're passing the context and the page name. So here we make use of material page route. We pass the builder, context to the function, and then this is the name of the class on which we want to go, or name of the page you can say. So on tap of this, it will take us to the next page. So let's go ahead now and run this application and see it in action. So here we have our application. Currently we are having two list items. If I click any one of them, you can see that it takes us to the next screen and it says this is the next screen. This is the raised button saying back. If I click on this one, I'll go back to the first screen. You can also make use of this back arrow to do the same. So that's how easy it is to route and navigate in Flutter. In this lecture, we'll be taking a look at packages in Flutter and Dart. Now, packages are reusable pieces of codes that we can plug in to our Flutter application and make use of it. For instance, if you want to implement Google Sign In, then there's a package for it and you don't have to rewrite the whole thing. You just go ahead and integrate that package in your Flutter application. In order to access these packages, they are available at pub.dartlang.org. So we'll be going over there and we'll be having a look at the packages that are available for Flutter as well as for Dart. So here, if I go ahead and filter by Flutter, it says Flutter packages. And if I go and say all, then this will show me all the packages combined, Flutter as well as for web. So here specifically, if you're looking at Flutter, you can see that there's a plugin available or a package available for Google Sign In. If I click on this one, it will take me to that particular package page, and there it will show you how you can go ahead with Android integration as well as iOS integration. What code changes you need to make at your end in the application, that is also provided. How you can make use of the package, that is also shown and demonstrated. And there's a full example as well written for you. So it just makes it very easy for you to integrate this package in your application. In the next lecture, we'll be taking a look at one such package in our application. In this lecture, we'll take a look at how we can install a package in Flutter application. For that, first of all, we'll go to a website where we can find those packages. And the website is pub.dartlang.org. And here you can see we will be implementing auto-size text. What exactly it does is, as you can see from the demonstration itself, that it will auto resize the font size. Now in order to install this, we'll be going to the installing tab, and there you'll see that this is the dependency that we need to have. Now where exactly we'll need this line is the file called pubspec.yaml. So in our Visual Studio Code, I'll be going to pubspec.yaml file, and here just below this line I can go ahead and paste this auto size text, save it, and the next thing that this will do is it will automatically go and fetch that particular extension. You can also click on this Get Packages button to do the same. Now once the package is installed, you'll be notified about it by exit code 0, which means it has been successfully installed. And now in the next lecture, we'll take a look at how we can implement this in our code. So in the previous lecture, we installed the package AutoSizeText. Now in this one we'll see how we can make use of it. The first thing that we need to do is make use of the import statement and import the package in our main.dot file. And here you can see we have imported the same import packages AutoSizeText, AutoSizeText. After that, you'll require to use this particular widget. Now here in our code, the second screen that we created, we have made use of the widget over there. So here we can see new sized box with width and height and the child AutoSizeText. Now the font of this will automatically decrease or increase based on the content that it has and the area it has. So for now, if I have just written this one, that's how I look, and I show you the code running in action, that's how it is coming up as of now. But if I go over here and increase if I save this and run the application again, you can see the font being auto adjusted based on the area that it has. And that's how we make use of a widget in Flutter. There will be a time when you will require to work on platform-specific APIs or SDKs, which Flutter is not supporting. So for such cases, Flutter provides method channel approach, using which one can easily communicate with the SDKs or APIs that are platform specific. For instance, over here you can see the architectural overview for the method channel, and messages are passed between the client, that's the Flutter application, and the host platform, that's either iOS or Android, using the method channel. So here you can see the Flutter method channel sends the data or the required information to the iOS host or to Android host, and based on that, this gets passed on to the Android platform API or third-party APIs for Android. Similarly, for iOS host, it gets passed to the iOS platform APIs or third-party APIs. Now, if you want to explore this further, there's an example provided over here which you can go ahead and explore. That's calling platform-specific iOS and Android code using platform channels. So here they have step-by-step instruction on how to create a project and make use of the method channel that we just discussed. And using this approach, one can obviously make use of those APIs that are not yet part of the Flutter framework. In the upcoming series of lectures, we'll be taking a look at how we can read and write data to persistent storage. And the first thing that we'll be doing is installing and configuring our package. The package which we'll be making use of is Path Provider package. So let's go ahead and install it in our application. Now the package can be found over here, Path Provider, pub.plank.org, and this is the package that we'll be making use of. All we need to do is copy this line of code from here and go to our Visual Studio Code pubspec.yml file, and just below the AutoSizeText package we can paste it over here and save it. The moment we'll save it, it will start getting that package and installing it as well. So here you can see the verbose messages are coming up. That is running Flutter package get in hello world, and it has been installed. Now once the package is there, we'll go to our main.dot file, and here we will be actually including it. So we'll say import, and then just as it says over here, package colon, so we'll say package and then path provider, and after that path provider dot semicolon, and This is the line that we just wrote over there in our main.dot file. And as you can see, it says that currently it's unused. That's why a green line is coming underneath it. Apart from this, we'll be also requiring some libraries or packages, you can say, which we will be using in the upcoming lectures. So I'll be including it over here. For instance, we'll be making use of the foundation.dot. So here, package, Flutter, and I'll be changing this to foundation. Next, I'll be making use of asynchronous and input-output packages. So for that, I'll just write import, and inside that I'll say .:async and import .:io. Now currently these three are not being used, but as we'll move along in this series of lectures, we'll see how to make use of them. So this one we just saw how to include and configure path provider package and including other necessary packages in our application's main.dot file. In the next one, we'll be taking a look at how we can make use of these to read and write data on a persistent storage. This lecture will be writing our own data storage class. So basically this is going to have a couple of methods to read and write to a given file, and then we'll have some methods to define the path and the file. So as you can see, I've written a class called data storage, and here all we're doing is first of all defining asynchronous methods. That's the reason why we had included .async package, and here all we're doing is saying that give me the path of the directory. So this gives you the location of memory card or the permanent persistent storage that we have on our mobile devices. Get application documents directory, and once you have the directory, we are just taking the path, returning it as a string. Then in the next method, what we are doing is we are creating a new file. We're calling it as appfile.txt, and this file resides in this path that we have. So path/appfile.txt. After that, we have created two simple methods. One is reading the value from the file and one is writing to it. So the write one, as you can see, we are passing the counter value. That's the reason why I've taken integer data type. We are taking the file using the await file method. So this is the method that gets called. And internally, you'll see that this file calls this asynchronous method called path. So they will have the file over here inside this variable, and once we have the file, we are saying file.write as a string. So whatever content we are passing over here, we are writing it as a string and then returning that file. So that's write method, and then we are having a read method as well. Now the read method takes the file inside this file variable, it reads all the data as a string and assigns it to this variable called file content. Now then we know that we are storing only integer data. That's the reason why we are parsing it as integer and then returning it. So the counter value, whenever we will be clicking on that button in our application, that will increment the value, and then that value will be written to a file called appfile.txt, and it will be read as well from the same file. So that will be coming up in the next lecture. Now once we have the package path provider integrated in our application, we need to accept some Android licenses, and in order to do that, we need to go to Flutter Android licenses. Please note that you will need to launch the batch file for Flutter, and there you need to go inside your application. Like over here, I am inside projects hello world, and then I'm running this Flutter Doctor Android licenses. You need to accept all the licenses that it shows, and once that's done, to confirm, you need to run this command again, flutter doctor -v, and you can see it says all Android licenses accepted. So we are good over here. Now what we'll do is we'll go to our code, and here we'll be making use of the data storage clause that we wrote in the previous lecture. The first thing that we need to do is, after creating this class, data storage, we'll be going over here in my homepage class, and there you can see we have taken a variable of type data storage and we're calling it storage. And the constructor that we have over here now ensures that it gets this variable. So we are saying required this dot storage, and that's the reason why you will see over here on line 29 that we are passing the storage as a variable and data storage over here. So that being said, the next thing that we need to do is make use of the read and write methods that we have in our data storage class. And to do that, we'll be going inside the my homepage state, and here you can see the init state is being overwritten, and after calling the super.init state, we're making use of the widget.storage.readVal. Now readVal is a function that we wrote in our data storage class. Then if the output is an integer value, we are using that value and assigning it to the counter variable. That's the reason why you see that now we don't have the counter variable initialized with 0, because we are initializing it with whatever value the read value method will read from the text file, and that gets assigned to the counter variable. Next, what we have done is we have changed the signature of the increment counter method and made it asynchronous. And here, once the state is set, that is the counter value is incremented, after that we are making use of the write value method of the storage class and passing the counter variable to it. So whatever value we are passing over here, that gets written in the text file that we have created in our data storage class. Now let's go ahead and start this application. Now that our application is up and running, let's go ahead and click on this plus icon and see whether the application is working or not. So you can see that for the first time it's reading the value 0 and then incrementing it by 1. Let's click one more time, and there you go. So now the value of the counter is being read from the text file that we have created and is also being written to that very same file. So that's how we make use of .io to write and read from persistent storage. In this lecture, we'll take a look at how we can access data from another server or URL. Now to do such calls, we have to make use of a package called HTTP, and you can find the package over here at pub.blang.org. And in order to install it, all we need to do is just copy this dependency from here and paste it in our pubspec.yaml file like I've done over here. Once you save this, it will be automatically included in your project. After that, you need to go to your dot file where you want to make use of that particular package and make use of the import statement like I've done over here. Import package http http. So when you do that, you will be able to make use of this package to make calls which will access data from a URL. For instance, over here you can see the example. Here we have a URL defined, and this one awaits the HTTP GET response, then decode the JSON formatted response. So over here we make use of the http.get and pass the URL over here. The response is then stored in a variable, and the status code, if it's equal to 200, which means success, then it will return whatever data was there in the body of the response and convert it into JSON response, and then you will be able to access the data based on the structure of that particular JSON. For instance, over here it has got this total items, and the item count is then shown like over here, print number of books about this URL. In case there is a failure, it will be handled inside the else block like we have over here. So we'll be exploring this in the next lecture, and we'll see it in action. In this lecture, we'll be exploring how we can fetch data using the HTTP package that we imported in our previous lecture. You can see that we have also imported one more package called .convert, and this is going to convert the JSON response. And for that purpose, we are having it over here. Now, after importing, what we need to do is create a class. For instance, over here, just after the data storage class, we have one class called getData. Now, this is going to return a response, and the method is getData, which is of asynchronous type. And then all we are doing is providing it a hard-coded URL, and it's just going to look at books which are available on Flutter on Google Books. And whatever response it's going to return, we'll be just counting that number of search results and then assigning it to a variable. So once this is done, we need to make use of this class. And what we have done is, in our home page, we have passed it over here, data get data. After passing it, we will be going inside our class, as you can see over here, and we have created another variable called item count. Now this item count is being assigned the value of the total results that are being returned from getData. And here you can see we are checking the status code of the response. If it's equal to 200, then we are just counting the total number of results, assigning it to item count variable. Once this is assigned, we are then making use of this item count now to create that many number of list items. So once the application will run, you'll see based on the result count, the list items will be generated. And here we have the results, you can see. So for the keyword Flutter, we are getting these many results, and that's why these many number of tiles have been created. So this is how we can make use of HTTP package to fetch data from external sources. In this lecture, we'll see how we can build and release for Android. So once you have created your Flutter application, you need to publish it on either Apple Store or Android Play Store. Now, in order to publish it on Android Play Store, what we need to do is follow the steps that are provided over here. So you need to visit flutter.io docs deployment Android, and here you can see these are the steps that we need to follow. That is reviewing the app manifest, what all permissions your app requires, that needs to be mentioned. Then reviewing the build configuration, where we have min SDK and target SDK versions. Then adding a launcher icon, signing the application, how I can create a key store, and then referencing the key store from the application, configuring signing in Gradle. So these are the steps that you need to follow, and enabling ProGuard. So if you intend to use third-party Java or Android libraries, you may want to reduce the size of the APK or protect that code from reverse engineering. So for that, we have ProGuard, and this is how you can configure the ProGuard. Enabling obfuscation and minification, and then building a release APK. Finally, you need to install that APK on a given device and make sure that the application is running properly. Finally, you can go ahead and publish it on Google Play Store. This is the link that you can follow in order to see what other things that you need to do apart from the Flutter checklist that we just reviewed. So that's how you can build your application and publish it on Google Play Store. In this lecture, we'll take a look at how we can deploy an iOS application created in Flutter on App Store. So we'll go through this set of instructions that we have over here at flutter.io docs deployment iOS, and this gives you a list of preliminaries. You need to have Apple account and membership, paid membership, to publish your apps on App Store. And after that, you need to register your application on the App Store Connect, register a bundle ID, create an application record on App Store Connect, then review Xcode project settings by going through these steps. This is how it's gonna look in Xcode. You need to add an app icon, create a build archive using these steps mentioned over here, then release your app on test flight. After that, you can release your app to the App Store. So you need to go through this set of instructions to publish your applications on Apple App Store.